Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Reaction Time podcast, where unlike 90% of the rosters in the LCS and LEC, we have our officially announced lineup for this podcast, and we're under contract. And the team has tweeted out official announcements without any of us having to request it. Shout out to Broxa.
Shout out.
But all jokes aside, we enter League of Legends free agency. We are 2 days into it. There are very few officially announced deals. There is a lot of speculation, and there is one big portion of the NA offseason that, as of like 20 minutes ago, hit a giant snag and may be blowing up two of the rosters that we think we know about. So we'll do our best to speculate about everything that's going on, but it literally might change while we're recording this podcast. I have my League of Legends tab of TweetDeck open. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it, so we can just kind of ride the lightning here as it goes. But we're going to go through rosters. We might hit all 20 between the LCS and the LEC as much as we know about them tonight, and we'll see where we're at. It's going to be an adventure. So Steven and Eric are here as usual. Gentlemen, how is the fine state of Missouri this evening?
It's not on fire like Kansas is, so that's good.
Thank goodness.
It's St. Louis Pizza Week, so getting to eat plenty of good local food.
I'm upset that I can't get St. Louis style pizza in Iowa. I have complained to Eric about this before the start of this podcast. My wife is angry about it than I am.
You know, Provel cheese has a shelf life of like 50 years, so if you get some, it's pretty easy to just make your own.
You could send me some, Eric.
Oh,
you
that's
have my address. You've been to my house.
Yeah. That'll be your. That'll.
It's just a plan.
Yeah.
Not
block
mine.
Of Provel cheese.
Give it to my wife. It'll be great.
Yeah.
But anyway, we should talk League of Legends. So let's just dig right into this. I'm gonna pick a roster. I'm gonna read it down as much as we know about, and Eric's gonna tell me how he feels about it, and then Steven's gonna tell me how he feels about it, and then I'm gonna say how I feel about it, and that's how we're gonna do this. So we're gonna start at the bottom of Eric's spreadsheet here, at the near bottom of the LCS standings, and probably at about the bottom of people's assumed LCS standings, with my formerly beloved CounterLogic Gaming, who have 3 real respectable players signed and have even announced their two newest signings in Finn and Broxa. But the complete roster, as far as we know, is Finn, Broxa, Polbelter, deftly, we assume, or Wind, their CLG Academy AD carry that played some last split, and Smoothie, with a new coach in Moon. Eric, what do you think of CLG's new look roster?
Well, so one of the most bizarre things about this roster is that typically we'd expect teams to bring in a new coaching staff and then have that new coaching staff that they're bringing in then determine who the rest of this roster is going to be. And it actually looks like CLG kind of did everything all at once. Moon was acting as their academy coach beforehand. People might remember Moon from playing in LCS as a jungler in the past, and was never too impressive as a jungler.
Famous Evelyn one trick, if I remember right.
He was an Evelyn one trick, and which is not necessarily a great place to be.
No, it's
and so then bringing him up from academy to pro is really fascinating, especially considering every player but Deftly on this roster has a better track record and a better current active career than he did.
Okay, now so I'm going to push back on that as far as the coaching thing is, because Moon did act as their academy coach last split, and a lot of credit has been given to him for how their academy roster performed, because if you look at that academy roster, it's not got any very highly respected players on it. It doesn't have any of the free agents we've seen go throughout LCS to make the jump from academy to LCS, and yet they placed 4th place in the Academy League last split, in large credit thanks to playstyle and drafting. So for a lot of the things I've seen have given Moon a ton of credit for how CLG Academy played last split. And you would think, since he'd already been working with the organization, that he may have at least had some input on some of this roster construction, rather than being completely left out in the dark. So I'm willing to give them some credit for that rather than none.
That's fair. My big concern is, like, how much are these players going to then be willing to work with him, and will they And will they be able to like actually come up with a game plan? Because we saw last split, the big problem with their main LCS roster was kind of like an absence or a void in strategy at at a high level, as well as actual like just being able to mechanically execute. So I'm really curious to see like, you know, will they have the strategy part nailed down? Because if they have the strategy part nailed down, even though their roster doesn't look as star-studded or as packed as the teams at the top of the totem pole are going to look right now, the other teams that are towards the bottom of the pack aren't actually looking that much better as far as like overall skill ceiling goes. So if they manage to actually figure out how to execute a game plan, how to not fall apart and crumble when this super long potential season starts off rolling, then maybe they'll be able uh, to not be in last place, which is kind of a shitty thing to say, but like, you know, CLG is definitely aiming for at least 8th this split so that they don't get into the danger zone for losing franchise status.
Steven, what are your thoughts on this roster? You obviously know Brock so well from his time last year. What do you see with this?
I think picking up Broxa, I don't know. It's a big fat check for maybe not a big payout, and then you're using up your import slot. So I'm neither here nor there. I think he can do well with coaching staff. Maybe that was the issue with Liquid. I still think that there was some kind of issue because he was a fundamentally different player upon arriving in North America. I think Smoothie is a good pickup, especially with someone like Deftly. I don't know anything about Wind, so it's not going to be a power bot lane, but maybe there's some like talent that can be cultivated.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think the Finn pickup is that bad.
No.
That's kind of the big thing I want to look at this, because I look up and down this roster, and let's remember Rogue went to Worlds with Finn, placed third in the regular season in summer in the LEC, which is notionally a much more difficult league, with Finn.
Oh, that was they finished first in regular season.
Oh, right. Yeah,
and then like third overall.
Right.
So it was a really great season.
Right.
Yeah.
Like they played really well, and albeit Finn was not the strongest part of their team, and that's been well mentioned and was noted as a big weakness in their world placement. You look up and down the list of top laners in the LCS. Alfari, Fudge, Huni, Impact, Someday, Licorice, Revenge, Niles, Lurlo, Finn. I think Finn's top half in this league.
I think that's an easy call.
I think it's what you're comparing him against that you need to consider when you're looking at him. Because, you put him in the LEC, obviously having to play against Alfari last year, but then, Wonder and, who's Fnatic's top laner?
Whippo,
having to play against some of the better top laners in the world, notionally, in LEC. To this, to NA playing potentially 3-4 players who haven't even played in LCS before, for a player with now Worlds experience, I think Finn is a much better pickup than people are giving him credit.
A part of why Finn looks so weird going onto this roster is that, when you think about traditional import slots and how import slots have been used in NA, it's been for big signings, like Someday, like Impact. So players who aren't just people with Worlds experience, but people who are either world champions or league champions from these other regions. And so it definitely was a weird it was a weird choice in a lot of ways because of that. But I totally agree with you saying that, when you look at the overall way the league is shaping out, that he doesn't look like a bottom half top laner right now. And that was one of the other comments I heard from about Broxa on this roster is that CLG has an open import slot before they sign Broxa on this roster. And you want to, awkwardly enough, you want to use the import slots on your roster, even if you have another player who you'd want for that role, because you want to keep these high value players from other regions on the team so that you can potentially trade them off later, as EG is attempting to do with Huni now, as Huni gets to this NA resident status.
Yeah, I just think it's a very
Correct.
expensive placeholder. If we're looking at it that way.
Do we? I don't think we know that. I have a feeling Broxa may not have commanded as much money as he once did this offseason.
Yeah.
If he left and joined as a free agent, that doesn't mean he joined for Jensen
Right.
money. Like, until we see the terms of a contract, I'm assuming that we will talk more about discount rosters in NA with some of the other rosters in the league. CLG is obviously one of the rosters that's owned by an NBA ownership group and owned by the New York Knicks ownership group. And Finn, for being an import, I don't think they broke the bank for him. I suspect they didn't break the bank for Broxa. Pobelter may very well be their best played player as it stands yet. And I think that it's budget, but you have your core import slots are experienced European players, both of whom have played at Worlds before. And that's a good core to work with, along with one of the best NA mid laners. Like, I think that's a very solid building place, and we know more about what they are and what they should be than we do about a couple of these other rosters, one of whom we're going to go to next. So I'm as optimistic about them as I could be with the players they've got. So next, we're going to talk about Immortals next, because I think that's the contrast point that I want to present with them. So Immortals have... I'm not sure if any of these are officially signed yet, but they have Revenge, promoted from
FlyQuest Academy.
And Xerxes, most recently of Misfits, right?
I don't think so. Wasn't he on Origin?
He
Origin,
bounced a lot.
maybe.
I think
Yeah,
he was on
Origin, because he and Destiny were on the same team
with Giotto, who is their new coach.
Yeah,
So
and then they got Destiny and support. So they have 3 pieces from last year's Origin squad that didn't perform very well. And then Insanity in the mid lane, who's been performing in Academy for a while. Whose Academy was he with last year? Was he theirs?
he was Immortals, and then he was their promoted to starting mid laner when they did the full Academy
They
bump.
swapped in their Academy team.
Right.
They were so bad.
And looked good.
And then they're rumored also to add Rays of the OPL, most recently of the Legacy team that went to Worlds this. So, Eric, initial thoughts on this? I know you and I have already talked about this roster a little bit. I'm interested to hear what you think.
So I like the players for the most part. Revenge is the most questionable pickup on this roster. A lot of NA teams are taking experiments or risks with top lane. I would put Finn kind of into this camp. The reason I bring that up is because Zion, Spartan, Haunser, Fate God are all free agents currently.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of experienced solo as well. So like there's a lot of experienced top lane players with results who are kind of sitting on the free market right now. And so Revenge getting this starting spot to me is a very interesting call. The rest of the players I really like. My big concern with Immortals as a whole is that we've seen Giotto come from Origin, who had a 10th place finish in LEC this past split. And it really felt like that whole roster fell apart, and they had a fantastic overall set of players on that roster. So for them to collapse as utterly as they did is very scary. And so then bringing over this coaching staff kind of from that roster scares me more than the players do, to be very honest.
So my one pushback is Giotto has had success before this in the LEC, and I don't think I'm willing to write him off after one bad split, and clearly the organization also wasn't willing to. I haven't. I should look up his. Just look up his history.
So he's been with Origin for a while, and so he's had Origin come in like in very high positions in regular season, as well as last place in regular season.
And he was with Schalke before that, and Giants before that.
Right, and these rosters after Giants, like have had these big swings as far as where they end up, and then also tend to fall apart in playoffs. And I know that's not necessarily a concern for the Immortals roster, who's trying to have a big rebuild right here, that their coach might not be able to win a final, but or figure out how to beat G2 or Fnatic in a best of 5. That's not really an issue that an NA team has to deal with. But like that's the kind of stuff that I look at is how does a team react in these like pressure situations, like, and do I think that they'll actually be able to build up? Because in these rosters that he's worked with, he's also been given a large amount of resources on both Schalke and on Origin for building around. And this is and like I really like Xerxes. I think Xerxes is a fantastic jungler and looks very good in this pool with what's happening in the NA LCS. But this roster is more cobbled together. There's no like synergy between a lot of these players, except for potentially Xerxes and Destiny. Destiny, who was called out in EU and for not necessarily being vocal enough and having an active role in team coordination in game. So that's what I really want to see out of this roster is, can they put together a game plan and then execute and not fall apart in mid and late, both in the game and in the season.
And I have praised Raze a lot on this podcast already, and I am absolutely going to have Raze's back. I think he's more than good enough to compete in this league. I am confident in the fact that he and Destiny can play together. The two of them played together on Chiefs in 2018. For the entire year, that team placed second in the OPL. I know at least summer split. I didn't check spring split, and was a best of 5 away from going to Worlds. That year, they lost to Dire Wolves, who were the OPL Worlds representative that year. But they were a great bottom lane together before. They've got experience playing together, and that's the kind of thing like. I mentioned with CLG's roster, you kind of know what you're getting with Finn and Brox. In theory, you know at least a little bit what you're getting with Raze and Destiny. You've got a bot lane that can play together and is stable, and in the case of both of them, Destiny didn't have a great success in the LEC. I think he's plenty good enough playing NA. And Raze, same thing. Like, I think that's a real solid bottom lane you have to build around and work with there. So I don't believe in their top side. I think they're a worse team than CLG, and I think they'll finish worse than CLG. But I think they'll be better than people think.
So I think Xerxes deserves a chance to perform well. Like, he's had some highs and some lows, and I think that's important to build around Insanity. You've had success with him on Academy. I personally like seeing like growing talent. So in my fantasy land, they actually looked at what Insanity wanted out of players, and they built a roster around this mid lane to give him success, because he could pop off, if I remember correctly. Like, how many games did he play on stage? Like 6, maybe? Yeah.
It's like half the season, I think. And his Kog'Maw was great on stage, and some of his like more carry-oriented champions that he got to play in mid lane that were scaling picks. So having an experienced jungler who knows how to play around mid laners who play scaling picks, cough Power of Evil. This looks like a pretty solid roster as far as the player organization is concerned. We'll have to see how Revenge fares in top lane against some of these other players. Revenge was in an interesting spot as far as top laners go in the academy scene. Fudge, who's like the now starting for Cloud9, was the best of the crowd in top lane for academy, but like you have to remember that Zion Spartan was there, as well as some other players who had some serious chops. So Revenge was decent on the overall like ranking, but he was like below Fake God, he was below Zion Spartan, he was below Fudge as far as like academy top laners. Picking like a middle of the pack top laner from academy to be on your LCS roster is is like both a commitment in some ways to like seeing how this plays out, and hopefully a sign that they've like trialed out players and they think that he gives them the best coordination with the rest.
And have we already committed to doing off-site regular season already, or is that still up for debate if they're going to be on stage or
I
not?
don't think we've heard.
That has
so there
not
might
been
be some
announced.
opportunities if they are going to stay like off-site, like where these academy players can kind of get warmed up and get accustomed to their team without having to do it on probably what would be a weird stage experience to begin with. So
with that, we're going to move to the roster we still, I think, overall know the least about, with Golden Guardians, who appear to be very hard hit by the financial issues the NBA organizations, among everybody else, are dealing with. Their parent team had an unfortunate year financially, dealing with injured players and no fans in stands, among other things. So it makes sense that they're cutting where they can. So their roster that we know of right now is presumed to be Niles in the top lane, Ablaze Alive,
Olive
in
Olive,
Ablaze Olive, fucking
Scouting Grounds,
sorry,
boy.
hate
Come
it.
on.
A Blaze Olive. Why would you not capital? Anyway, and Stixay and Newbie from the South Latin American, Central American, LL whatever.
The whole region, just
There it is. Oh, because he played for All Knights in the whatever it's called. And LLA, there we go. I forgot what it was called this year since they merged. So they played for All Knights in the LLA, who were, if I remember right, the top. They finished top of the regular season of the LLA. It was an upset that Rainbow Seven made Worlds. So coming from a good team in the LLA, but still someone we know basically nothing about. So Eric, do you have deep thoughts on this roster?
My big thing is I do like them starting Niles. Niles came out of Scouting Grounds this year. For people who didn't watch Scouting Grounds, Team Cloud that Niles was on ended up in the third, fourth place match, which was a surprise because people thought that Niles, as well as Captain Shrimps in the mid lane, would be able to get Team Cloud to potentially being in the top two out of this event. Niles was the best top laner in the event. He looks great on tanks and carries. He's really tied in with Licorice in how people talk about players in the NA region for native talent. Giving him a starting roster spot, like if you gave it to, if you were going to try out a top lane fresh, he's a good option for it. Because he knows something about wave management. Like, I watched him play, and he actually seemed to know what to do when he was losing lane or when he didn't have jungle proximity. So that's what you're looking for. As far as the rest of the roster goes, Ablaze Olive has been in the academy scene for a while now after coming up through Scouting Grounds. Yeah, and
Scouting Ground was with TSM Academy 2017, 2018, 2019, and then Golden Guardians Academy last year.
Yeah, and so he has a ton of experience. I don't know how well he stacks up against some of these other mid laners who are floating around. Stixay is the other like real big question mark player. So a lot of these players with the Blaze Olive, with Stixay, are people who like were kind of in very unfortunate circumstances towards the end of last season, and are now going to be looking for a big excuse to build up. So hopefully these players are hungry. I have a lot of confidence in the Golden Guardians coaching staff. So I'm really hoping that they're able to work with this team and build some success, even though the players are coming from all kinds of different places in order to make this work.
Yeah, I like Nero. Like, he does good work, and I think he's pretty decent at like looking at how players will play together, and then kind of like they're like, oh, okay. I mean, he did that on Echo Fox, so I don't see why not here.
Well, and the success of Golden Guardians last year, even with a slightly more financially solvent roster, I guess, that roster also wasn't expected to perform too well, and they ended up placing like 5th overall in the regular season, and then had a really good performance in playoffs. Closer looks phenomenal. FBI looks phenomenal. They made bank trading these players off. They're one of the teams that definitely look net positive as far as like finances go from the free agency window so far.
Yeah, and that might just be their goal again, just to like let's middle of pack this and be very successful and do another build up. I'd be very curious to see who goes into that jungle position. I would like to see maybe like someone like Acadian or one of the older gen junglers that deserve another chance on the starting roster.
In Arrow, I will note, kind of, sort of a product of the OPL as well, since we're getting so many of those this split. Spent a couple of splits coaching in Australia, in addition to his repertoire in North America. So I quite like him as well. So I'm optimistic they need a jungler. I'm curious who they're going to get. That's the missing piece, obviously. But we'll see. So closely tied to the fate of the Golden Guardians roster is the Golden Thieves, 100 Thieves roster, which may look familiar if you have looked at last year's Golden Guardians roster, because it's 4 of the 5 players from that roster. It's Closer, we assume Demonte probably, but Ryoma is still in the picture, and FBI and Huhi, but with Someday in the top lane, and still Zix at the coach. So, Eric, how do you feel about upgrading Golden Guardians roster with a Someday?
Honestly, seems like, as far as if we were thinking about this from how do we compare it with last year's Golden Guardians, seems great. Someday is a much more stable player than Haunter. Haunter was their weak spot in a lot of these playoff games, where he would build leads on weird picks like top lane Lilia, and then would presumably then feed the entire game away. And so having a player like Someday instead, who albeit had a really weird last split, I think he was. I like to give him the credit of putting Someday ahead of the curve on figuring out how OP Ornn was, and so he just played it into literally everything. But it didn't look good for the team as a whole with their old roster, because Someday on Ornn doesn't deal with the fact that your mid laner is losing lane, and your bot lane is meant to go even, and then you have problems. So this roster, though, looks much more solid, especially if it ends up also being Demonte in mid, with like still having a great team fighting AD carry, having the best jungler in the league, and then having a really strong top side of the map puts them in a very good spot.
Yeah, for sure.
That being said, I don't know if this is enough of an upgrade on that roster for them to place further in the season. Like, I don't know if they can get above 4 in overall standings with the way these teams and rosters are shaking up, and like with just like skill ceilings. I don't know how
much
further up
Closer
they can
and
get.
FBI are your question marks then. If you want to know where that ceiling lies, it's their personal ceilings. If they can go further, even further beyond where they were in playoff energy, that's a higher ceiling than maybe this roster looks at first glance.
Yeah, well, and as you mentioned, Someday getting to be more unleashed because there are better pieces elsewhere on the roster is only going to make them look better. Because if there's a player whose like mechanical skill ceiling is possibly higher than literally anyone else in his position in the league, it's Someday. And if they're better able to play around him as a result of some of these changes in the roster, as a result of having more pressure in other places, that's only going to make them look better and better and better. So it's ironic because they changed 4 of the 5 positions, but I think their ceiling is still dependent on how good they can let Someday look. Speaking of Demonte, I should mention that we don't know for sure that's happening, and we don't know for sure that he's leaving Dignitas. But if he leaves Dignitas, we don't know who Dignitas' mid laner is. So let's talk about them. Dignitas reportedly has Lorlo, Dardoch, somebody, Neo as of right now, but maybe Sneaky, and Afromu with their coach Invert. Eric, this seems like YouTube views.
It seems like sick YouTube views. It seems like quality memes, sick dank memes, which is great. I love that shit. I don't know how good they are, but like that would be fantastic.
Like that's the first question with this is how much does Sneaky actually want to play? He's seemed very content living the streamer life the last few times I've checked in on him.
I mean, the big question will turn into money as well as some of the other situations involved. Like all these players have clauses that say like, I want to play, but only if your roster has so-and-so players in it or looks like it actually will be an enjoyable experience for me. And I have a feeling that'll be a lot more of what Sneaky cares about than like, say, what their odds of winning LCS are like. He'll care about like, are you paying him enough to make it worth his time?
Like to a certain point, should they just sign Scara to play mid? Like, really
that
just
seems
run back the meme team.
That seems less likely to me. If they sign back anybody, it would probably.
But like,
I would say Shifter over Scara as far as
Shifter's
like
probably
that,
better these days. You're right.
That quality goes, but the point remains that it does feel like it's to some extent about views. And I'm kind of curious though how that roster would stack up against some of these younger, less experienced rosters that are showing up. Like, you know, how would Sneaky Afromu fare in lane against Ray's Destiny, or against Johnson Diamond, or against FBI Huhi? How will that go? Because we haven't seen Sneaky in LCS for like a year now, and that would be a really interesting factor to me. Is like how does Sneaky in lane fare against these younger bot lanes that might not have the stage experience or like not stage experience in these regions, and would they be able to like not look like trash? Because Meme Dream Team Delta Fox did not look good in lane. And so like how teams fare mechanically in lane would make a big difference to me on like how this whole experiment would go. On the flip side, like Lurlo's currently who we know about in top lane for them, but that's not set in stone either. So like this roster has a lot of room for like
currently have 2 import slots too. Like they're not using anything yet.
Right. So there's a ton of cards on the table for what they could do. And we'd have to see how it plays out. All I'm hoping for is quality content with Dignitas's roster.
Yep, I think that's where we're at, is with content with them. Among the reasons I feel okay about CLG and Immortals positioning in the table. Anyway, let's talk about a better team now, probably, because it's time to talk about new FlyQuest. FlyQuest, after a very successful season and very successful positioning, have to completely reinvent their roster.
Yeah.
Like, completely. They're probably going to be building 5 new players next split because they've gotten eaten up by the bigger teams. With Santorin and Power of Evil on their way elsewhere. It is weird to me that Solo is not on a roster. Can I just say that real quick?
Like, I wonder if there's a reason. Like, I think I think there's an engagement discussion happening. I would hope so. He really strutted his stuff on Fly and like really like was pulled into like a situation, and it was like, yeah, I can do this. And that, I think if we're looking at like massive rebuilds, like he actually has value on someone that you can pull in and be like, hey, we need you to just perform, and we need you to be there when we need you, every time that we need you, and let these new fledgling players like look at you and listen to what you have to say. I think that's his value, and I think that's why he would be picked up somewhere.
So what we do know about this FlyQuest roster is that the deal for Licorice, Palafox, and Diamond is locked, and so Solo also came up through C9 Academy back in the day. So it's trading him in for the next wave of C9 Academy farm into LCS talent, where Palafox,
FlyQuest, as it has been since its inception, is still
Yes.
just C9 White.
yeah. So Palafox, by the way, looked very good in Academy, and I was very impressed when he was in Scouting Grounds several years ago because he was not the number one rated mid laner going into that tournament. I'm pretty sure Lin Sanity was going into that Scouting Grounds, but Palafox showed up better than the other mid laners in that event. He showed up better in team fights. He showed up better in learning and growth. And then his team looked much better than they were expected to in that event. And then here he is in Academy, working with Coach Westrice, who's probably now undervalued on Cloud9 and the rest of their infrastructure. And then ends up now making a starting roster spot. So this is a team that's very scary because of the fact that these other teams are experimenting on rosters, and C9 Light is in fact a very powerful roster that's been scrimming or has been laning against C9's main roster for ages. Jack talks about how one of the things that C9 does better than the other teams in LCS is making sure that their players get to sit down, get to talk, and get to 1v1 against their LCS players. So Palafox and Diamond and Licorice and Fudge have been playing against each other or these other quality players in LCS for a long time, actually, and should look good. Diamond's another one of these long-time Academy scene players that it's great to finally see get a shot on the big stage. And has looked wonderful for years now.
Well, and for him to get an opportunity theoretically to play with Johnson, who was the big breakout star of last split for Dignitas, that's a really exciting new young NA bot lane to get a chance to see on the big stage, and that's really, really good to see.
Yeah. Diamond also, I believe, has had decent results in TCS. Am I remembering correctly?
I have
It's
no
been
idea.
a while.
Okay.
Okay.
And we haven't even talked about perhaps the most interesting signing yet. We talked a lot previously on this show about Rainbow Seven jungler Jose Diodo as the potential breakout star of the world's play-in stage and of the solo queue in China. And lo and behold, FlyQuest have made the move to sign him and bring him to LCS. So, along with the rumor of Newbie from All Knights, the first two imports ever from the LLA, and we saw what he could do on the game's biggest stage. So I'm glad to see an NA team took the initiative to bring him in, and that's a really exciting potential signing for the league in general, in addition to just.
And I do think I don't even think we have to wait for their success. This just showcased what the other regions can benefit from, getting their world slot and doing well and performing on stage. We are creating a good talent funnel and different opportunities to have other places than just Korea and China retiring to places or Europe and importing. The whole talent pool is now open to opportunity, and if teams are showcasing that, hey, yeah, we can do these things and we can get success out of it, there's just going to be more of it happening.
For sure. And it's shown nowhere more clearly than the AD carry pool. I think I talked about this last week, but the fact that there are 3 former OPL AD carries that are going to be starting in NA next split, 4 if King gets a starting slot somewhere, or he's just chilling on C9 Academy getting better. Those not being import slots now is a huge talent funnel. The OPL has good players. I've been saying this for 5 years. There's so much potential in that league if you give it the proper infrastructure, and seeing all these some of these guys that have had the chance to come up through the NA Academy system and have made this move over the last couple of years get their rewards now is a big deal for the league in a different way than developing NA talent. If NA can commit to developing the minor region talent, that's a different thing you can look at for development of the NA Pro scene.
Yeah. I think we're already seeing a big benefit to restructuring how Academy works. How they redid it. Has it been 2 years? Yeah.
I think it's been 2 years now since start of
Yeah,
2019.
and
if
I think
remember right.
the players that started in that program, and I really view it as a program, to now like just like watch their contracts grow, like just from being in that space. That's really positive to me, because that's just going to trickle down to the collegiate levels and like the next programs or whatever that's going to be developed. Like that's what has been severely lacking, and like the proper career path and the like longevity of the sport in North America, like those are the things that have to be set in stone and have to show like health.
Let's move to let's move to C9 next, since they pair so nicely at all times with FlyQuest. They obviously, we don't know for sure yet, but we assume that their roster is going to be Fudge promoted from Academy, with Blabbert, Sven, and Vulcan from last year, and the biggest acquisition probably in the history of sports, of League of Legends esports, in Perks moving from G2. We know that Perks is leaving G2. G2 has
Bye-bye.
put up their farewell Perks video thing, which is still just kind of surreal. The Perks is synonymous with G2 in my head, and I feel like a lot of people's. That team has had success unparalleled in any Western team in the modern game the last few years, and he is the heart of that. He is quite likely the greatest European player to ever play the game, and this is a ridiculous signing that should upgrade an already very good Cloud9 roster to the next level. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah. Well, the roster looks fantastic. The big thing that Perks can bring to this team is that you're getting someone who helps transition leads or even gold deficits in mid game with experience and knowledge of macro that so far only G2 and potentially Fnatic have had in Western organizations, with how they play the map. And that was one of the big problems that we saw that caused Cloud9 to fall apart late on in their run in playoffs this past year, is that they couldn't figure out what to do when Blabber died. And so having a player with more game knowledge and macro sense to maybe also stop them from inting can really help this roster. On top of that, the other big point with C9 that's interesting is the coaching change, with Reaper now stepping down and not being on the roster, and with Rainover taking over as head coach. So we'll really this will be a big telling point to see, can this how much did Reaper do is kind of a question. And if this roster falls apart with these pieces, then to me it might be more about the coaching staff than about if they're not gelling with Perks or something else. And so I really want to see how Rainover does in head coaching role. Rainover's a very, very intelligent player and has had a ton of game knowledge. So I'm really excited to see how he takes over in this role. But it is a change. And whenever we have these coaching changes, in addition to these player changes, like I really want to see what happens with how they approach the game, how they play on the map, and does Blabber still look good if they go into this next regular season, or has he been exposed again?
And there's obviously, like, is Fudge as good as he looked in Academy? Because he's had, like we've said, the C9 development system. He's been training against Licorice for how many years, and he looked like the best top in Academy last year. Is that going to be good enough against a Sunday, against an Impact, against an Alfari? We're going to find out. It may be, but it's like the one thing that's not tried and true in this C9 roster. And even you even have this Perks and Sven Core, who they played together before. You know that they know how to communicate and work together. It's the theme that I keep coming back to, is these teams that have stuff that they know works. I think is going to be a big deal moving into this upcoming season.
Yeah, I would also like to see that there is a good transition from a European import coming over. I feel like the last few big ticket European imports haven't fared well in their first split, even their first year that they're here. And
Sven's
Sven, Broxa, like something's up with transitioning, like culturally in the house, or something's off, and I would like to see that addressed. Like even I think Jizuke suffered from that a little bit, and something's whack, and it needs to be addressed. And I just don't see it being like player synergy or anything like that all the time. It might have been in some cases, but there's something within coaching staff or with the housing situation. Like you have to transition these players appropriately, so that's not affecting their stage play.
And the next roster we move to is going to be a great example of that for another European import coming over for the first time. TL returns their bottom half of the map with Jensen, Tactical, and Core JJ.
Yes.
Obviously, really strong from what we saw last year. Tactical being a huge upgrade when they brought him into the lineup. Adds Santorin from FlyQuest and moves Alfari over from EU to join the top lane, removing Impact, their longest standing player in the last from the 2017 team, I want to say. So a big change, but notionally an upgrade with a player of Alfari's caliber coming over. Steven, I'm going to go to you. How do you feel about this new Liquid
I love
top jungle?
I love
top jungle
Santorin a lot. I like ever since Energy and all that time, like he's always been consistent, and I would define him as that kind of player. He is very consistent, which is what I think they kind of shoehorned Broxa into playing, because they changed him from a playmaker to a consistent, like, do your jungle duties, which is what they were playing around with Xsmithy, and that's why he worked so well. So I think Santorin can be that Brock and that like consistent player that maybe that they can leverage like different strategies now. And I'm hoping Alfari is another piece of that puzzle where he can get a lead and hold the lead and do some crazy stuff and be successful in top lane. But I just have a big question mark on importing European players and transitioning them to showcase what they showed in Europe here in North America.
Eric, what do you think?
So Alfari's been on bad rosters or underperforming rosters for a long time and has looked good. When Origin was on their like 10th place run last split, Alfari still had some of the best laning stats out of any top laner in LEC, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And a part of it is that they were picking him good lane matchups, they were prioritizing it, but a part of it's that he's actually really good. So having a top laner who can play carries definitely broadens how they can play the game. Potentially, they could flex into things like how Damwon Gaming just won Worlds, which is you get lane priority, bot lane with Core JJ and Tactical, and then you roam Core JJ up to top lane and you gank for that Kennen top or that Camille top or that whatever he's playing top lane carry nonsense. And then you use that to snowball a top lane advantage, which then gets you a lot of prio on the map. So like there's a lot of ways that this roster can succeed if they figure out if they can communicate well. And I have a lot of confidence in this roster. I think they're going to look very good this season, both from like the known quantities, but then also from how these players look going in. Where Alfari has looked bad is, surprise, surprise, late in playoff runs. So, if they don't come in first place in the league, I do definitely see them ending in top 3, top 4.
Yeah, they like the bottom 4 seems like a pretty safe bet, and I think the top, partially because the top 6 seem like pretty safe bets too. Like it seems like a pretty clear divide between the TLC9, TSMEG, 100 Thieves, FlyQuest, and the other 4. Within that, I think there can be movement. Like, I think 100 Thieves or FlyQuest could overperform where I expect them to, or like a TSM could underperform, for example. But it feels like there's a pretty clear line that unfortunately happens to be right on the playoff line. Anyway, we have saved TSM and EG for last because the weirdness that broke tonight from Bloop GG of Esport Maniacos and from Jacob Wolf of formerly of ESPN, now Free Agents, about the proposed deals involving Lost moving from TSM Academy to EG, Huni moving from EG to TSM. Both could be in jeopardy because of TSM's potential new signing of Sword Art from Suning Gaming, formerly of Flash Wolves, longtime Taiwanese player, is in jeopardy because of finances and immigration from China, which is obviously in a very interesting place right now due to the coronavirus pandemic. Wolf also reported that by virtue of being... Where's the tweet that I want to say? Getting a visa for a Chinese citizen, Taiwan is still technically China, and there being no tax treaty between the China and U.S. means that Sword Art would effectively be double taxed on his TSM earnings, which I assume was known going into the signing, but is still unfortunate. And so if Sword Art doesn't sign, Doublelift has said, according to this reporting, that he's going to not play in the spring split, which leaves TSM short an AD carry, which means they would want to keep Lost, which then means that the Huni deal wouldn't go through, and EG wouldn't have a AD carry to play. So it's a big old giant mess, but we know that TSM has Spica and signed Power of Evil from FlyQuest, and we know that EG has kept Svenskeren and Jizuke and signed Ignore from FlyQuest. So if the things work out the way they should, what do you think about the EG roster of Impact, Svenskeren, Jizuke, Lost, and Ignore? And what do you think about the TSM roster of Huni, Spica, PoE, Doublelift, and Sword Art? Eric.
Well, I'll start with the TSM roster. So I have major qualms with whenever TSM tries to import a shot calling support player. It has not worked. They've tried this multiple times with Worlds finalists or semifinalists.
But Eric, they have a different mid laner now.
They do, but that's not necessarily where I have problems.
But Eric, their old mid laner is their coach now.
So yes. So where both the Yellow Star move and the Mithy move fell apart is that Doublelift didn't follow up on calls specifically.
Like play.
So this is a really weird spot for this roster where like you have some players who are Doublelift and also to some extent Power of Evil who are more focused on building up advantages in lane. And then
also Huni.
Well, I'm focusing on those two because they're more slower in-lane advantages players. They want to take the game slow. They don't want to press for risks. On the flip side, you have three very high-risk, high-reward players with Huni, who has the most like solo isolated deaths out of any top laner last split in NA. He gets a lot of solo kills, but he also just dies a lot. And then you have Spica, who would like die at the enemy red buff invading without backup several times in regular season. He looked good in playoffs and decent at Worlds compared to the rest of his roster, but like he was a very like map prio focused player. And then you have Sword Art, who in regular season in LPL like would also die on warding missions. People have referred to him kind of as like, you know, a Taiwanese Hillsong player, right? Where he's going to go in there, he's going to look for these big plays, and he's going to get caught out and die warding. And this is like what you have to expect with these three players. So all of a sudden now you have this weird thing where maybe, just maybe, with Sword Art and Huni on this roster, you have enough go all in to make Doublelift do something, is like kind of how I would see that playing out. But it's a stretch. So I actually see this roster as a 6th place regular season team, but they end up coming in top 3 because they make a good playoff run like TSM always does, with all these other rosters falling apart in best of 5s. So like that's kind of where I see this team falling, is like barely squeaking into playoffs after some truly atrocious gameplay and then making a deep run for no reason.
Literally winning it in the last one's case.
Right. On the flip side, if we look at Evil Geniuses, this roster suddenly looks very stable. I love Jizuke with Impact. I think that's a great combo for solo laners. Also, putting Ignar on that roster, who's another player who knows how to make plays on the map, who can roam and set up plays along with Jizuke and Sven Skaren. And that's a really solid core. I think this roster is very good overall, has a lot of skill, and it'll be up to these lower tier teams to prove that they can outperform in like micro lane mechanics or something if they want to take games off of them. I also really like EG's coaching staff. Peter Dunn is really good.
Yes, and I said this a month ago. TSM should have just kept Lost if Doublelift thinks he doesn't want to play.
That really kind of like hits me the wrong way. If that, I hope that's not true. I cannot fathom, like.
Well, so Doublelift tweeted out stuff that largely after Bjergsen announced that he was retiring. So a lot of this was a chain reaction off of Bjergsen after their terrible Worlds performance, announcing that he wanted to retire and move to head coach, and then Reggie being very supportive of that move and letting that happen. So with that, there's a huge chain reaction, because does Doublelift still want to play if he's not playing with Bjergsen is a great question. And like I could see that causing that both caused a whole huge chain reaction, because TSM suddenly has an open spot for a mid laner, and so they're going to pick up the best one that's like a free agent that they can get, which they did. And then it also causes this chain reaction of like, what are these other veteran NA players do with Bjergsen retiring, with Xmithy potentially not coming back to play because he might be too burned out at this point, with all this other stuff happening. Like, does Doublelift still want to play? Do these other players still want to show up? And I could totally see that happening, and that was a shocker. And it's going to continue to be one.
Like, saying that's the reason is to me very different than like, if you don't pick up this one import that I've requested to be in my lane, that's the reason I'm not going to play. And like, I just, it's, he was pulled onto this team. He I don't know.
We could spend a lot of time diving.
Surprised.
We could spend a lot of time diving into Doublelift's mentality.
Is anyone, after how badly it went south at TL, is anyone surprised that it could go south this bad?
I just wish it wouldn't be true.
No,
I don't like that.
Which is why you don't bring Lost away. You idiots. That's why you have a really good OPL AD carry on your academy team who's ready to go if and when this goes south. And if he decides he wants to retire this offseason, perfect. We got the solution ready to go. Don't already agree to sell him to EG.
Well, and that's another reason, like, maybe they are getting blindsided as the staff just as much. That has to be it.
So.
Don't they have like TSM Junior? How old is their AD carry on that? Is that what they're gonna do?
Well, that's well, they don't. I don't know if they have a. So they don't actually have an amateur.
I thought it was literally called TSM
like
Junior.
100 Thieves was
just 100 Thieves.
Like 100 Thieves was the team with a quality amateur team, and the other ones didn't. Shoryu is a free agent. So, like, that is an option on the table. Shoryu, by the way, was on Team Infernal at this year's scouting grounds along with Shady, and they hard stomped that tournament. So I would not be shocked if that was like a fallback for these rosters, is like pick up Shoryu,
and you also have
Shady.
the giant EU AD carry weight. Because like we might not even get to EU tonight because we've talked for an hour and a half about NA, but
upset. Crown shot.
But we know that Reckless has left Fnatic. We assume Reckless is going to G2. It's been reported that he's going to G2. So that fills one slot. But then Reckless's slot on Fnatic is open, so somebody's got to take that. And then somebody's got to take the next spot down. And somebody, like, if has Schalke signed anyone to replace Upset, or is he still technically on Schalke?
So he was on Origin,
that's right.
Which is now Astralis, and Astralis is on Jeskla. So like, there's a ton of weirdness
somewhere, and Crownshot is somewhere. Like, there's EU 80 carries to be gotten if you need an EU 80 carry.
Correct. And like even if we're not looking all the way to EU, Bang is currently a free agent. Who
Bang
was
is another player who I question if he actually wants to play competitive anymore.
Yeah, he might be out. I think he went back to Korea actually with the pandemic. So but like King though is like we talked about from
because I know his beast is fixed now too. Get him.
Cody's son. Like there are plenty of AD carries available on the totem pole who you could go to in this scenario. So like that's there. The bigger shock one to me with this whole thing was Huni, and like why did they do this? Like why go for Huni? It doesn't really make sense. Because like Huni actually hasn't had great playoffs or like end of season success in NA.
Like
he's had good performances in EU. He's had good performances in
could someone
Korea,
be asking for him if this is another one of double lifts? It's like I want this person, or I'm out.
Well, I'm more worried it's the flip side, which is Broken Blade was done, and then they needed to figure out what to do with Top, and so then they had a gut reaction.
And do y'all remember the public reaction when EG acquired Huni from Dignitas and his giant contract and how heavily questioned that was to begin with? And then he was fine on EG, but they weren't going to be able to play him until he became till his 4 years was up, which is now. So he's an NA player now. But I'd rather have impact. If I'm EG, I'm dancing a little dance that Huni transferred, because if we're talking about playoff performance, ain't no 80 carry in NA I'd rather have than impact during a playoff performance. Not one. Or top lane or whatever.
Also, TSM Junior was a thing. That's where Johnson came from. So I don't know if they still have it.
It's if it does exist, it's not in the top of the amateur scene as far as that goes. Like there's also a huge academy and not academy, but there's a huge amateur scene overhaul happening that Riot's proposed for this offseason. Mainly designed to protect these amateur circuit teams that are now emerging, like Radiance, 100 Thieves Next, some of these other rosters, to protect them so that academy teams just can't poach players. Which was happening
because it's worth it.
Like let one of these amateur circuit teams spend money to try and train up a player, give them exposure, and then you profit off of that rather than building up your own infrastructure. So they're trying to make changes to deal with that, and that could lead to more of these amateur circuit teams like really having an importance as we move forward. But yeah, it's really baffling kind of what was happening with that whole situation, and like I'm pretty hyped for Broken Blade though with where he's going. That Schalke roster in EU looks nuts, but like this is like that was a huge factor in all of this too.
Yep, for sure. Well, that's all of NA. We've talked for an hour and a half. I propose that we have our next episode be EU-centric, and we can just address the small bits of NA that filter through from there, since we've been pretty comprehensive on what we know about NA to this point.
I like that. Boys? That sounds like fun.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So we'll focus on EU next time. There's a lot of interesting rookies coming up from the EU Masters scene into the EU scene. I hope and assume that we will have clarification on the AD carry like staircase that's going to happen soon once a couple more signings are confirmed, and see where people end up. We can also take a look and see if any potential signings have taken place in Korea and China. There isn't expected to be much in the LPL for a while because they just kind of take longer, and it takes longer to do stuff these days. But there have been plenty of notably announced free agents in Korea, and one signing of note, Carrier to T1 so far. But we feel like there's going to be a lot more to come through. Obviously, Chovy and Noguri being big name free agents. that are available on the Korean side of things. So it will be interesting to see all of that. We'll come back and check on that next week. Steven,
Go to
promo.
funkygames.com. There's a link tree there that goes all magical lands, including our merch store, which has new shirts just in time for Christmas to get those you love. The great gift.
And I heard a rumor.
Yes, there might be a discount.
Are we?
Yeah, if you put in
code?
Funky FNKY at your purchase, you get 15% off. That's nice. That's like not paying for shipping.
Holy cow! You
can.
get a
Yeah, these are
better
nice
deal than that,
shirts.
can
They
you?
feel good. You can't get this one. This one's mine. You can't have it.
No, give me your shirt. I want it. Take it off and mail it.
YouTube will come and beat me in my basement if I take my shirt off on stream. My big old man tibbies.
So we will be back next week. We'll talk about lots and lots of EU and whatever the heck else happens over the next week, because it's crazy free agency season. Anything could happen. We'll see when we record next week. I assume maybe Wednesday evening might be complicated because of the Thanksgiving holiday here, but we shall see what happens, and we'll talk about that off stream. So I'm David. That's Steven. That's Eric. Follow, like, subscribe, do all the good things, send us feedback, do all the things. We'll see you next time. This has been the Reaction Time Podcast.